escalation in Hodeidah leaves civilian casualties among children. World Food Programme announces cuts in food ration in Yemen due to funding shortages. The United Nations says African migrants in Yemen put extra demands on relief efforts. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rushan Fuad. Houthi militia has escalated in Hodeidah and shell-populated areas in Hais district. The latest attack targeted 5 children while they were herding sheep. Such a Houthi attack comes when regional and international efforts are underway to push for peace in the 9-year conflict. The following report has more details.
Hodeidah Governorate has witnessed its latest rounds of escalation. In an unscrupulous display of bloodlust, the Houthi militia has directed its weapons toward innocent children in the Wadi Nakhla area of the Hais district south of Hodeidah. 5 children were seriously injured in the mortar attack and are still receiving vital medical treatment.
We were targeted by the Houthi militia without any probable cause. We lead a stable and secure life here. 5 children were out herding sheep in the village when the first attack occurred. The second one immediately followed as they called out for help, and the third one came after some delay, about 15 meters away from the children. We live nowhere near active front lines.
Despite the remoteness from the front lines, liberated villages have not been spared Houthi gunfire, with unsuspecting children falling victim to criminal bloodlust. Meanwhile, citizens continue to voice their anger over lukewarm support from the United Nations, with some even accusing the organization of conspiring with the rebels.
Our region gets shelled daily with all forms of artillery. Citizens, including children, regularly sustain wounds or have these homes demolished in the aftermath of these attacks. Many have to flee their homes. This attack was launched on civilian grounds, not on an active front line.
The human rights organization Mayoun said in a statement on Wednesday that the Houthis' targeting of these children while they were herding livestock is a flagrant breach of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and international humanitarian law. The organization demanded a swift halt to these crimes and that the perpetrators be held accountable. It encouraged the United Nations, the UN Envoy to Yemen, UNICEF, and human rights organizations to denounce and firmly reject this terrible act.
Local human rights group called on the security authorities in Tamar to assume full responsibility for the armed gang storming a lawyer house. This came in a statement issued by the National Foundation for Combating Human Trafficking, which condemned the storming of an armed gang into the house of a lawyer and human rights activist. The statement added when the lawyer returned home in the afternoon, he was surprised to see his house occupied by an armed gang. The food security situation in Yemen continues to deteriorate. To make things worse, the World Food Programme announced it has cut some food rations in Yemen due to funding crisis. Such an announcement threatens to leave millions of Yemenis with no food. This report has more details.
Yemen's food security situation worsens with millions facing emergency hunger and famine-like conditions. The World Food Programme faces a funding gap, warning of unavoidable ration reductions causing further food insecurity. The World Food Programme announced it had to cut the food rations of more than 10 million Yemenis by 35% due to a lack of funding, and warned that it might have to take additional steps in the absence of the direct grants. In its Yemen Food Security Update released this week, the program said that during the months from January to May 2023, the overall food imports saw a decrease by 28% through Red Sea ports and by 11% via the southern ports of Aden and Mukalla compared to the same period in 2022. It said essential food items were reportedly available across the Yemeni markets. However, close monitoring is necessary for the upcoming months in light of the low levels of food imports. Currently, WFP is targeting 13 million people each distribution cycle, with reduced rations equivalent to 65% of the standard food basket. Due to the ongoing critical shortages in funding, WFP was compelled to shift more than 900,000 beneficiaries from cash-based in-kind food assistance starting the fourth distribution cycle. According to the WFP update, the prevalence of inadequate food consumption bounced back to pre-Ramadan levels, increasing from 36% in April to 45% in May. Around 48% of the surveyed households in government-controlled areas could not meet their minimum food needs, compared to 44% in areas under Houthi authorities. Meanwhile, it said the cost of minimum food basket (MFB) remained almost unchanged in Yemen compared to the previous month. Year on year, the cost of FMB slightly increased by 2% in government-controlled areas, while it significantly decreased in areas under the militia authorities by 18%. Yemen projects an absolute deterioration in food security, and malnutrition is bouncing to the ceiling as the World Food Programme lacks funding grants, leading to unavoidable ration cuts that will make millions of people face a worse famine nightmare.
Yemen, the worst famine the world has seen in 100 years. Right now, over 8 million people are facing starvation. Since the beginning of the war, 85,000 children have died due to the lack of food. We cannot allow this to continue. The Yemeni people can't wait.
2 children were injured in camouflaged object left over from the Houthi militia in Taiz. According to local sources, the 2 children were taken to the hospital for treatment, as they were tampered with a strange body before it exploded, which resulted in their serious injuries. The Ministry of the Interior imposed new measures to prevent citizens from carrying weapons in the main cities. This comes in light of a recent increase in the number of civilian casualties due to carrying weapons among civilians. The United Nations announced that the soaring numbers of African migrants in Yemen has put extra demands for relief efforts. Those migrants pass by Yemen to get to Gulf countries to seek better living conditions, but they are often trapped in Yemen. This requires greater humanitarian intervention on the part of the UN. The following report has more details.
Over 77,000 migrants have crossed the Gulf of Aden to Yemen, surpassing last year's figures and fast approaching pre-pandemic levels. The eastern route in Yemen is marked by human rights violations, including torture, violence and trafficking. Most migrants from Horn of Africa hope to find work in Gulf countries, but often fall into the hands of traffickers, who take control of every step of their journey. Violence, exploitation and abuse against migrants is widespread, and perpetrators act with impunity. Insecurity, arrest campaigns and forced transfers have left approximately 43,000 migrants stranded across the country. The International Organization for Migration (IOM) emphasized that people on the move continue to be largely invisible. VHR remains the only safe pathway home for stranded migrants in Yemen, with IOM assisting 5,631 migrants, including 5,572 Ethiopians, to return home on VHR flights. The rising number of migrants in distress demands greater resources to respond. IOM is appealing for greater funds to scale up its assistance to stranded migrants, particularly at migrants' response points in Aden, Ma'rib and Sana'a. where migrants can access safe, dignified and free protection and health services.
وبعدين يعني ما تعبوا وبعدين يجوا لما يموتوا نصيبه إذا ما مات في سبيل الله يشلون من الشارع اللجوم.
الفريق الطبي يقوم بتقديم الخدمة الصحية بالفحص والاطمئنان على صحة المهاجر بتقديم الخدمة الصحية للمهاجرين الواصلين حديثا عبر السواحل اليمنية.
عمري 20 ما في شغل على الحين كذا علشان كذا أروح السعودية أدور رزق.
الحالات التي يتعرض لها المهاجر من مشاكل تنفسية أو هضمية أو مشاكل جلدية يتم معالجتها في العربة المتنقلة بإعطاء المريض سواء إذا كانت المشاكل جلدية هناك العديد من المراهم والكريمات، أيضا المشاكل الجهاز الهضمي يقوم بإعطاء المضادات الحيوية أو السوائل، وأيضا إذا كانت مشاكل تعب وإرهاق فيتم إعطاؤه المهدئات.
Coming next. The United Nations says Yemen to witness heavy rains and flooding in the coming weeks. Welcome back. The U.S. Navy announced that it managed to prevent Iran from seizing 2 tankers in the Gulf of Oman. The U.S. Navy added that this incident reflects Iran's destabilizing role in the region. This report has more details.
According to U.S. defense official, the U.S. Navy intervened early Wednesday morning to prevent Iranian Navy ships from seizing 2 oil tankers in separate incidents in the Gulf of Oman. An Iranian ship reportedly opened fire on the tanker during the second seizure attempt. At around 1 a.m. local time, an Iranian naval vessel approached the TRF Moss, a Marshall Islands-flagged oil tanker in international seas in the Gulf of Oman. When the Iranian vessel approached, the tanker was traveling through the Strait of Hormuz and heading towards the Arabian Sea. When a U.S. Navy destroyer and Marine patrol plane approached the ships to prevent the oil tanker from being detained, the Iranian ship reversed direction and left the area. However, only a few hours later, a second Iranian Navy warship approached another oil tanker, the Richmond Voyager, which was in international waters off the coast of Muscat, Oman. The tanker sent a distress call as the Iranian ship approached the Richmond Voyager, according to a U.S. official. The U.S. Navy warship got the distress call and sailed at full speed to the site of the incident. The Iranian ship had already called the oil tanker and was attempting to impede and board it when the U.S. Navy vessel approached. According to the U.S. official, Iranian crew members on board the Iranian Navy ship opened fire on the tanker with small weapons, striking the side of the ship near crew living quarters. No one was hurt on board the Richmond Voyager, and the Iranian vessel fled the area as the U.S. Navy destroyer arrived. During the incident, the U.S. Navy did not open fire and no U.S. troops were hurt. Since 2021, Iran has harassed or detained roughly 20 international flagged commercial vessels, according to the U.S. Navy, posing a clear threat to regional maritime security and the global economy.
The Food and Agriculture Organization revealed that isolated desert locusts have been reported in a Jowf governorate. The organization confirmed, however, that no desert locusts have been observed anywhere else in the past weeks, expecting the possibility of individual breeding in parts of Ma'rib, Atak, and Hadramaut. A recent study called for the formation of a mini-government responsible for economic affairs in the country. The study, prepared by the Makkah Center for Strategic Studies, indicated the deterioration of the economic resources available to the legitimate government. The study also called for activating the role of the various oversight institutions to reduce corruption and enhance transparency and accountability. Shipping sources revealed that the French company started maintenance work for Balhafgaz facility in Shabwa Governorate. According to same sources, the teams affiliated with the French and local companies have started maintenance work for transmission and production lines, internal operating machines and turbines. Balhafgaz project is the largest economic project in Yemen with a production capacity of about 6.9 million tons annually. The United Nations warned that heavy rains and flooding will hit major areas in Yemen in the coming weeks. This is expected to double the suffering of citizens who are already crushed by the conflict. The following report has more details.
The United Nations renewed its warnings of the dangers of floods, which are expected to hit separate areas in Yemen during this July. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization said that forecasts for the current month of July show heavy rains in the governorates of Damar, El-Dara, Lahj, and Taiz. The organization warned that about 1,500 people are at risk of being affected by the moderate floods in these areas. The UN organization also stated that last June, Yemen witnessed heavy rains which caused devastating floods that drove dozens of people into poverty. According to the governmental and human rights reports, during the past month, many homes, agricultural areas, and properties were severely damaged, in addition to the death and injury of dozens of individuals as a result of the heavy rains and torrential rains that hit most of the country. As soon as the rainwater falls and the torrents flow, anxiety and terror spread among the citizens. It's not only the torrents that worry them, but the mines and explosive devices carried by the torrents that the Houthi militia planted on the roads, farms, and areas they reached. Thousands of mines were swept away by the torrential rains in Ma'rib, few of which the citizens were able to deal with, while thousands of mines and explosive devices were still washed away by the torrents, posing a threat to civilians and livestock, impeding the movement of citizens, and they are no longer able to carry out their daily activities or reach their farms, which requires the intervention of the concerned authorities to clear those areas of mines. The floods are flowing with what dazzles the farmers and astonished them after it revealed the huge amount of mines in the land that the Houthi militia has polluted with a wide network of mines and explosive devices, until death has been waiting for children and women in plains, valleys, and villages, and every day falls a victim with no sin, except that they live in a time of the militia amid the international silence which encouraged them to continue their crimes against Yemenis.
Here is a reminder of the main headlines. Houthi escalation in Hodeidah leaves civilian casualties among children. World Food Programme announces cuts in food ration in Yemen due to funding shortages. The United Nations says African migrants in Yemen put extra demands on relief efforts. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. See you soon.